everyone, welcome to Vintage SF. My name is Bart. I'm from Bart's Book Space, and this is
Richard. Rempel is with you here today. Thank you, Bart, for joining me as we talk about one of your favorite authors and one that's becoming one for me, Stanislaw Lem. And we're talking about, as you can see, you have that cover. I have this cover here from Penguin of Fiasco, written, I guess it was written before it was published in 1986. It's very interesting. This book was actually contracted by a German publisher, even giving him an advance, which apparently he hasn't really had with a lot of books. It was first published in German in 1986 and then in Polish in 1987. Right. One of the reasons that I think Lem was looking for an advance, by the way, this is his last science fiction novel as well. But one of the reasons that Lem was looking for an advance is he was leaving Poland at the time. And I was wondering, I don't know, I didn't ask you this in advance at all, but do you have any idea what was happening in Poland around that time that he would want to be leaving the country?
Yeah. So first of all, just quickly, Thank you for the invite. This is a fantastic book, I think, to talk about. So I'm really excited to dive right in. And the question of why Lem leaves Poland at that time, he actually leaves a few years prior to publishing of this book, is because the political situation in Poland was unraveling. Some may remember that time Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain. Solidarity movement in Poland with Lech Wałęsa, who later gets the Nobel Peace Prize. He was in jail, and Lem was a supporter of the dissidents, essentially, in Poland. Due to that, he had some political troubles, and he had an opportunity to go to Germany and live in Germany. He was attached to a university. I forget what town and what the name of the university may have been. So he leaves Poland at that time to be at the university for about a year in Germany. And also it was advantageous to him to kind of get away from the political system, which was prosecuting him at that time somewhat. I don't know if he would have ended up in jail necessarily, but as a proponent of the dissident movement in Poland, he definitely was in some political turmoil. He actually only stays 1 year in Germany, then he travels to Vienna, where he lives for another 6 years, up until the Iron Curtain falls down with the Berlin Wall in 1988. It would have been, I think, he comes back to Poland. He didn't want to live in anywhere else. He wanted to be in Poland, but the political situation at the time forced him to do it. Because of that, this is the only book that was first published outside of Poland. And then it took about a year for this book to be published in his homeland that he loved and then lived up until 2006. So after writing his last science fiction book, he still lived for another 20 years. He lived into his 80s, but he did not write any more science fiction. I think this title also, Fiasco, is interesting in that this, to end, such a prodigious writing career with a fiasco. What? But if I can actually say one more thing that sure, just popped into my head. This is an aside from Lem, but I lived in Poland. I lived in Warsaw at the same time as he would have been leaving Poland. And I remember as a kid on a cold winter day, I woke up. Usually this was a weekend, so I would put the TV on and watch some cartoons. On the weekend, we had some cartoons. Back then in Poland, we only had 2 channels. There was nothing on TV. It was very strange, just like this snow kind of it was morning. I told my mom that I'm gonna go sledding next to the house, the building I lived in between buildings. There was a big hill that I would go on and just get my sled and go down. So I remember pulling up this sled, snowy day, pulling up this sled up to the top. I sit on it, on top of this hill. It felt like a mountain to me. It was a small hill. But for a kid, I would have been 7, 8. And I look, and I could see from the hill, I could see a main avenue in Warsaw. And all of a sudden, I see tanks just rambling. I've never seen a tank in my whole life prior to that. Tanks and armored vehicle, a column of them just driving down, maybe, 200 meters from where I'm sitting. And I looked around and there was not a single person outside. And I realized, well, this is strange. it was morning, but there should be people out. There should be other kids on the hill. There was nobody. I picked up my sled, ran back down, went home, and then we told my mom that something. I saw tanks. We turned the TV on, and the next bit of news was back then the leader of the Communist Party in Poland, Jaruzelski was his name, talking. He always wore dark glasses, which was very strange, thick lenses, talking about martial law starting in Poland. This was in order to prevent Soviet Union attacking Poland. He had to kind of impose martial law and kind of get these dissidents under, control. And this is the beginning of why Lem then at some point after leaves. But I remember that day. It's one of my, kind of established memories. And Lem, of course, he had so many things that as a young man, he had a good childhood, but then, World War II, when it breaks out, affected him. And his pessimistic view of humanity stems from some of his unfortunate experiences during World War II. But that stayed with me. Seeing those tanks on the streets of Warsaw, just driving down, was a powerful vision for a kid.
Unbelievable. The you were just mentioning about World War II as well. There's another channel, Damien Walter, Science Fiction with Damien Walter. He has a really amazing video called The Secret History of Stanislaw Lem, which I'll link into the description of this one here. But if you would like to find out more details about Lem, that is an excellent, excellent video.
Yeah, it really is. I watched that video probably like a year ago. I agree. I remember the video vividly. It really also dives into the reasons why Lem writes the way he writes. It talks a lot about his experiencing and his near-death experiences during the war. Lem, growing up, he didn't even know that he was of Jewish heritage. Supposedly he went to Catholic. It's very ambiguous. He didn't like to talk much about it. But yeah, he finds out pretty quickly that he's of Jewish ancestry when the world breaks out, and he is. Everybody is threatened during the war. So many Poles died who were not Jewish, but obviously Jews were targeted specifically, and he was as well. At one point, he was up against the wall and would have been shot if it wasn't for a certain event. So World War II had a huge impact on his outlook. And even though he didn't like to talk much about it, a lot of things that he felt, emerged in his future writing in science fiction, where he could, cover it up with different, with aliens perhaps, or lack of understanding thereof. He really was affected greatly by World War II and at a young age.
There's something about science fiction that allows you to explore ideas in a way that doesn't seem as threatening as if you were writing a political document. And I think that is something that we can see threads of that within Stanislaw Lem's work. Yeah,
for sure. And one more thing about that, actually, Lem, when he starts writing his books, his first books are not science fiction, but then he realizes that censorship is such that he really won't be able to say what he wants to say, keeping in mind that he lived in Lvov. It was a city in Poland back then that was actually attacked by the Russians, because, everybody knows about Hitler and Germany starting the war. World War II starts with Germany attacking Poland. But at the same time, Russia attacks Poland from the east. So very interesting. And the fact that Poland was communist did not allow him to write. So what you're talking about is exactly why Lem is kind of steering towards science fiction very quickly, very early on, because with science fiction, it's a little bit easier to sneak his thoughts on his worldview without being, censored.
And I should mention that you and I filmed a episode as well about the novel The Invincible earlier this year, I think it was. I'll put a link to that as well in the comments or in the description for this video. But one of the reasons, obviously, that I decided I'd love to do another buddy read with you on Lem is because of this passion you have for Lem and for your country and your knowledge here. I appreciate you bringing that to us.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. I remember the first discussion was very interesting, and I'm sure this one will be as well.
Yeah. And the Invincible really brought forward how Lem really took science and ideas very seriously. And in fact, he was very ahead of his time in thinking about implications of technology. And this one, I don't think is any different, but it also deals with a lot of philosophy and ideas. And I'm just going to mention Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox is the apparent contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life existing and the lack of evidence for its existence, prompting the question of where are they? There is a huge chunk in this novel that deals with that one. So I wanted to mention that at the beginning. But this novel really is a novel of almost individual sections and stories that highlight the best of Lem, perhaps.
Mhm.
The first chapter of this book is dealing with a story that was apparently an unpublished short story of Lem's. And it was, I mean, I hadn't read this book before. I didn't know where it was going. It was a fascinating chapter on Titan with a character named, what was it? Augustin Parvis?
Parvis is the name. Yep.
Parvis, yes. I have some notes here on the side. So do you want to talk a little bit about how the book opens with chapter 1?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. As I was reading, as I read the book and thought about it, it did feel somewhat disjointed, and I felt like that first chapter really set something up that I was so excited about that didn't fully pay off. It does pay off, and now that I'm thinking about it, there's some implications for that chapter that also kind of go back to other books like this one, Tales of Perks. This is a Polish version, Perks the Pilot. But it is almost like a stitch-up novel in that first chapter feels like it is in the sense that it's not really necessary. The story kind of could have started with the further mission, omitting this part, and it would have been still a coherent, complete story. But the first chapter I thought was incredible, fascinating. I loved it. It basically, not to give us, but it is beginning of the book anyway. I think the book basically starts with a fiasco and ends with a fiasco, and it's called a fiasco. And the beginning of the book is incredible. So we are on Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn, and here I was really impressed with the descriptions of the planet that Lem. Fabulous, some of the best descriptions. It really puts you there. He really takes you on a tour of the planet in a way that is very interesting, also with a little bit of philosophy of showing how this evolution of the planet without human interference takes place. And also, growing up in Poland in the 70s and 80s, like I did, I could right away pick up on some things that perhaps others do not. When Parvis lands on Titan, he is instantly introduced to a scenario where we're finding out that things are not so great, basically. And this was quite often seen in Lem's writing because he lived in the East back then, which constantly things were breaking down. This was part of life. Everything was broken all the time, pretty much. So here we have this fiasco. This chapter 1 ends on a fiasco, but certainly there are fiascos throughout, and we're finding out that there's this incredible machine that both you and I, because we did this as a body read, were really excited about. Visually, it was well described. What is it called? The Digla?
They call it the Digla. It's basically a mechanical strider, a big robot that you are inside of.
Controlling, yeah. But apparently this machine that humanity builds that seems to be incredible, in many other authors' writings would be invincible. Well, it isn't. 4 guys went out and have disappeared and are presumed lost or dead or cryogenically whatever. So right away we find out that things are not great on Titan. They're losing people left and right. And Parvis, our at that point presumed protagonist, says, well, I'm going to go out and find them, specifically one of them, because that person is someone who means a lot to him, a friend, a mentor, Pirks the Pilot, who is famous from other writings of Lem. So I was super excited. This is incredible. So he's going into this, onto Titans, onto the moon to look for Pirks the Pilot. But then, of course, in Lem's fashion, things don't go exactly as you might expect.
And there's these vents. They're trying to travel between one station and another station, and through this area, there's a lot of geographical features, and there was these vents that created a forest of crystalline structures. Yeah. And somehow, somewhere between, they tried to make a shortcut through that forest, and they've lost people. So Parvis is trying to find Pyrrhix or others. He himself finds out why things are not coming out of that forest. There is a fascinating, and this is just the setup in chapter 1, so I'm going to talk freely about this part. Yeah. There is an emergency procedure that if you think you are in danger of dying, that's it. It's kind of like you have an ejection seat, but it's an ejection seat. It's called a vitrifax. It's an ejection seat upwards into, they call it a bell, to be cryogenically frozen. And what happens is it shreds your clothes and just like instantaneously freezes you. Like, it does damage to your body as it happens there, but the idea is to try to make sure that your mind is frozen. But this is a shot in the dark. There have been very little success of taking people out of this cryogenic or stasis that they've put them in. And so we're left at the end of chapter 1 with this guy taking this emergency measure. Yeah. And then there's a time jump, maybe almost 200 years. You want to talk about what happens next?
Yeah, for sure. I would say also that this was very well described, this cryogenic. There was some machine going in through the nose, like instantly into the mouth, like just freezing the body outside, inside instantly. Very vividly painted by Lem. Very interesting. And then we have the 200-year jump, and we do find out very quickly that this was when people are talking about this procedure, that what was done to Parvis was a very early stage of the development of this technology. So obviously the technology has improved, and this isn't anything new. I mean, we do have people. Walt Disney is supposedly frozen, hoping to be brought back at some point. But in any case, 200 years into the future, we have found a place where aliens exist, and also humanity understands that there's been a lot of studies, and Lem talks about this window of opportunity for humans to actually make meaningful contact. This window of opportunity is open, and they're going to send a spaceship to that planet. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to interrupt to say, and the interesting thing is, it's a theory potentially that this is a planet. They had a little bit of evidence that this is a planet where there might be intelligence. We're going to get into this, but how do you fit that window? Because of space travel and the thousands or even millions of years it takes to get somewhere, how can you make it that your civilizations in whatever length of time you have in this window can match? So anyways, I'll go back to you here.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about it as well. I don't know if I remember exactly the time scale that it would have taken, but there's a lot in this book. We have like the main kind of the spine of the story, and then we have many asides where Lem goes off on a tangent, explaining technology. And here's a lot of interesting technologies. This spaceship, super powerful, that needs like a platform essentially in order to be propelled. And in this case, humans, the platform is going to be the Moon Titan, which is going to get destroyed by the by getting this ship started, essentially going. But when they're on Titan, preparing for this, they find the body of Parvis. They find the bodies of all of these cryogenically frozen humans, pilots.
200 years old.
Yeah, 200 years old at this point. And they decide that the best way, because this is all technology, to revive them is in low gravity. So actually putting them onto this ship and taking them would be the best way of doing it. They realize also that they really can only bring back one based on the degradation. And basically it's going to be kind of a combination. I don't know if I remember this correctly, of two of them who are best preserved, which is Parvis, our protagonist, and Pyrrhix, one of Lem's famous characters, but they don't really know which one is which. So that's also interesting.
And I don't think they necessarily know for sure that Pyrrhix is one of them, because they find scraps of the uniform are like really degraded, but they find one uniform that has a label, and all they can read is the P at the beginning.
That's
and
right.
They know that the people who are lost there from their ancient records are the only two that have P at the beginning are
That's
Pyrrhix
right.
and Parvis.
And that's right.
Now,
so they don't know which one it is.
For the sake of the novel, we kind of assume that it's Parvis, but we really don't know, because
I assume
resurrection.
If you
assume, did you assume Pierce?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh,
100%. I think because Pierce is Parvis is someone that is just introduced in this one chapter essentially, but Pierce is fairly famous. So I assumed. I mean, it's never given, it's never fully explained, but I assume that this is the end story of Pierce. And yeah, but again, it could be it's not stated. Lem does not give explanations to many things in this book. He leaves things out for interpretation, and that's part of the fun of the book, including the aliens, which we will talk about later on in the video, I'm sure, because there's a lot of ambiguity also when it comes to aliens.
In chapter 2 or 3, we have a lot of detail about this resurrection of whichever character it is.
Yeah.
He takes on a new name, Mark Tempe. Yeah. And he really doesn't know who he is. It is a brand new person with some memories and things still intact in terms of what society and technology was like back in his day. It's a fascinating look at lost identity. Sometimes you see those kind of ones done in terms of lost memory novels where you have somebody who has amnesia, but this was even to a further extent, just really feeling like you are out of space, out of time, out of sync with what's going on in the ship.
Yeah, I agree. It was well done. The resurrection procedure. I think not only that, but the part which does feel like a different, almost like a different book once we get into this part of the story. But it's also very well done. The characters I thought were interesting. There are few characters who really struck me. There is a priest who is on this ship for obvious reasons to add some theological discussions, which we get into later on. There is an AI, a computer AI. There is the captain of the ship, the main, also well developed. So we have this new person, Mark, who's kind of lost his identity, and we never really find out who he might have been previously, who is interesting. But it reminded me a little bit of Blindside, where you had different characters in Peter Watts's Blindside on a ship that each brought something completely unique to the story. I felt there was a little bit of that here as well. The characters were good. I thought. I liked that. I liked the setup. I liked learning about them. There was some character development, and Deus, the AI specifically, was very interesting. I thought as well, as it was a different take, I think, on AI. It wasn't quite like the Odyssey with Hal just being, kind of a ominous presence. Here, Deus, which means deity or God in Latin. And he says, I didn't name myself, Deus, by the way. But we find out that basically this artificial intelligence, as seen by Lem, is just a reflection of humanity.
No,
because right.
Yeah, it is it's very different in terms. This is where I won't be talking about this. This is where Lem is so fascinating in describing the alien, and AI is alien to us too. Now, the characters here, I'll just briefly go through them. We have Mark Tempe. By the way, he was a pilot as well. So this, he was a pilot of the rocket ship that got them to the Moon Titan and then the Strider. And so he still has those skills. And so they actually are able to utilize him in that way. Captain Steerguard. There's Deuce. Oh, sorry. How do you say that again?
Deus,
that's right. Father Arago, he's the Vatican envoy and medic. And Nakamura, who is a physicist. Now, you may notice that we have not talked about a woman yet in this novel.
And we
won't
won't.
be. This is
Yeah,
very male-dominated science fiction.
well, I would say it is interesting because I read a couple of books uh, back to back where, for example, I read with Ira. Hey, Ira, in case you're watching. We read The Mote in God's Eye. That was the book I read prior to Fiasco. And in that book, we have one female character, literally one. But I almost feel like what Lem does by not having any, and I'm not saying this is anything to be praised, uh, but it's almost better than having one that's written poorly and says things that are really questionable.
So in the middle of the novel, we have a lot of detail. I'm just trying to move along here.
Yeah, of course.
For how the technology, the Fermi paradox, how they're going to match up trying to find a civilization. They have a control over gravity. It's either, what is it called? Sidereal or sidereal engineering. And so that control goes into play with a black hole that they use to try to match themselves up to this planet and also to get them there faster. And they launch a second smaller ship to be the ship that encounters it. It's called Hermes. And in that ship, we have 10 characters, and those 10 characters are going to attempt to make contact with the civilization that they find there. Now, at this point, I think maybe we'll try to go. This is about now. We're talking about maybe halfway through the novel. I think we'll try to go very general in terms of how we refer to things. But if you have enough information here and you want to read this book, feel free to go on and
and I would say honestly, even if you listen to the whole thing, picking up the book, I don't think there are any spoilers in the plot because it really is. Maybe other than the kind of the last page, literally the last page. It's a book that you need to read because of the things that we won't be able to talk about, the deep philosophical themes, the hard science fiction themes, like around usage of the black hole for propulsion and time dilation things, and Fermi paradox. All these things you'll want to read about, and you're gonna love it, I think, because it's really well done. And the descriptions of the planets, which were fantastic. This is such a great mix of everything. He just threw everything in there, stirred it. It's not always cohesive, and sometimes it's a little bit like you wish it was here and it's there, but it's fascinating. So
he was like a painter. His writing was like a painting to me, like some of the best cover art paintings that you've seen of science fiction planets. That's what this looked like to me in my head as he described these. And the contact situation that's coming up with this planet is like no other contact situation you may have ever read, I believe. And it looks at the possibility, is there realistically any way that we could connect with an alien culture? It's not like our connecting with different nations here on Earth or different cultures here on Earth. It's alien. And our preconceived notions really become a fiasco for us too out there. Yeah. And so maybe we'll talk now about some general ideas there with the contact idea, and then we'll continue to go back into the themes and things that we enjoyed or maybe didn't enjoy about the novel.
Yeah. So I would say that this was Lem's theme throughout. I think Lem was obviously very skeptical about the possibilities of. He believed aliens exist just by the virtue of the vastness of space, but at the same time did not believe that contact is possible between beings removed so far in time and space, and the limits of human understanding would be very quickly apparent in any such a scenario. And every single book that he wrote when he wrote on that subject reflects that, obviously with Solaris and the impossibility of understanding their Invincible, also a different take, but a similar outcome. Obviously Fiasco here, but also His Master's Voice, another book where humanity struggles to comprehend a message that we receive. So each book has a different take on this, but reflects this inability. And this is no spoiler, because this is, if you know anything about Lem, this is his worldview, universe view, galaxy view, I suppose. Very, very pessimistic when it comes to the possibilities for contact, and then highlighting all the possibilities for things to go wrong in those scenarios. But yeah, this was an interesting book in the sense that it shows a completely unique world where if anyone has read Solaris, you know how ambiguous the planet of Solaris as one gigantic cognizant ocean may be. This was even more in some ways, because you really don't know what these aliens are ever. And I think this is Lem not only thinking that, hey, philosophically we can't understand them. I think he's showing in his books he's so rigorous that he's not gonna give you anything. If you like to read about aliens who are furry or have 3 arms or something like, and that's what makes them different, do not pick up Lem, because you're gonna be disappointed. His books, he sticks to his guns. There's just no way really to understand the nature of those beings.
And in this contact situation, they don't reply ever. The people from Earth are trying to connect with them all sorts of different ways. And then they talk logically about how can they do this. And there's some features about the solar system which are very unique and interesting. They start to find ways that would be to draw their attention, which are more and more destructive. You can guess there's a fiasco with what the destruction is. Lem just plays this out, and you keep arguing to yourself, well, what would I do in that situation? How would I handle this? We've come all this way. We don't want to leave without being able to connect with whatever is on that planet. And Lem, as you said, has that very ambiguous style of writing about aliens where we don't really ever truly understand what is happening. And that last page is fascinating, and we can't really talk about it, but if you have trouble reading through this, just be prepared. That last page is going to get you.
But he does build the world in a very interesting way, even though we don't find out how the aliens exactly look. But the world building is fascinating. I mean, at some point, these aliens, for example, raised the ocean into the sky, into orbit, and created a ring. But now that ring is ice. Also ice, ring of ice. Yeah, which was fascinating. But he was like, but this ring is falling apart. It's not done properly. And humans are like, how can beings who are, because they're thinking from our perspective, humanity, anthropomorphizing it, how can beings who can raise an ocean into orbit not do it the right way? Because it's apparent that this is breaking apart slowly, and it's going to come back and at some point back to the planet. So perhaps these beings are no longer affected by that. They're underground, like in virtual reality, and just operating these drones, because there are things flying. There are things who have made contact. They're just not the aliens, who have attacked also this ship in different ways. It's pretty clear that these aliens do not want to be contacted, but human hubris is such that, well, we're on a mission. The mission is to make contact. Like you, Richard, said, we've traveled all this. The contact is going to happen one way or another. That's just kind of humanity. Instead of having this, humility in the face of these ethical dilemmas, we are going all out. We are going to force contact. And I think Lem is perhaps right in thinking that indeed that's kind of how it would be. But if we had the opportunity, and in that scenario, to make contact, and few humans would have to make a decision based on logic, and there's a lot about logic and game theory also, which was also very interesting, the asides about that. But ultimately, those things help the crew of the ship making these decisions that ultimately, are a fiasco. And
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to steer us away from going too much further into the the plot at all.
Okay.
The planet's name is Quinton, and the beings, they call them Quintans. But this was Lem at 65, writing his last science fiction novel. People who've read any Lem can see that there's some themes that he's been drawing from his work over the last 20, 30 years in science fiction. Now, I know you've read much more Lem than I have. What is your opinion of this novel? Do you recommend it? What do you have to say?
So it's one of those books that I think is, I mean, it was a great read for me. I thought it was fantastic because also it harkens back to some other Lem's works. And I think it's a fantastic culmination of his thought. It's not a perfect novel, in my opinion. And for someone who hasn't read Lem, they may have problems. They may have issues. A lot of the writing goes over my head. Lem was intelligent. He was brilliant. He had supposedly IQ of like 180. I listened to him talking Polish interviews with him in Polish. And it's fascinating. So he's a deep thinker. And I almost think like a book like this, he, instead of concentrating on the main spine of the story, he's throwing almost too many ideas into it for some. For me, it was fantastic, but it isn't a book necessarily that I would recommend right away. Although, for the right person, I think it's going to be a revelation. A lot of people like this book. I looked it up even before today on Goodreads just to see what kind of score it has on Goodreads. I think it's like 4.10, 4 stars, 4.1. Pretty high for a book that is pretty dense, pretty deep. It's not a pulp. It's not a fun ride by any means. It's a fiasco from beginning until the end. It just. So I do think a lot of people would benefit from reading this book. And I think reading quite a bit of science fiction over the years, and especially now in the last couple of years, you and I have been, having these channels and reading a lot more than in the past. I think when you pick up a book that feels a little bit different from others that you've read, it's amazing. Whether you love the book or not, it's such an exciting time to pick up a book that's written from a different perspective that feels fresh, even though it's an old book, feels fresh because you haven't read 10 others recently like it, that are just regurgitating the same ideas in the same way with the prosaic kind of a plot. This book is deep. It goes for it. Whether it's a home run for your viewers, I don't know. But I think it's worth reading. It will be a book. There are some books, other books that I could mention that I read and I didn't love the experience, but I thought I wrote something profound and I was happy to have read it, and will be thinking about those books and coming back to them. And this is, I think, one of those books. I think just about any book you pick up from Lem might have that effect on a reader. But this is a good one. This is, for example, I think comparing this to Invincible, this has a little bit more philosophy, a little bit more of those intellectual bend, where the story at times gets lost. So it just depends what the reader prefers. It's great. There's so many fantastic quotes from this book. Also, I've written a few. The one that really stands out from this one is, in my opinion, I don't think anything can behave as unintelligently as intelligence. And I think that sums up humanity and his, view of humanity. So yeah, I recommend this book, but not because it's a fun book to read, but I think because it's a challenging and unique addition to the SF pantheon of great works. That's my. What do you think?
I think it's intelligent literature that happens to be science fiction, and maybe happens is the wrong word. That purposefully is science fiction. It definitely is, to me, heads and shoulder above the normal science fiction that you might find, or that you find on a lot of the different authors we've been exploring. Just simply on that fact, I would rate this very highly. Now, yes, there's digressions, and sometimes you don't get where he's going with these digressions. But if you stick with him, there's going to be a lot of things you're going to be thinking about after the end of this novel. And I can tell you, this is definitely one of those novels I'd like to reread again in the future because of all the concepts in there. And it took me on a ride, which I wasn't expecting. from the beautiful painting images of Titan and the adventure with a Strider robot and trying to find lost people, to the resurrection of a character, and we're unsure necessarily who that character still is, to black holes, Fermi's paradox, connecting with a culture, an alien culture. It's spectacular. And you're right, it's not an easy read, but ultimately I would call it very rewarding. For me, I'm very excited to read more of Lem's work and to see how this plugs into all the things he's written before.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, Richard. I'm glad to hear that it's resonating with you. I would think it would. I think you're such a thoughtful reader of science fiction, and you've read so much that I would assume you would find things fascinating in Lem's way of thinking and writing, because he thinks deeply and he writes well. I would also put him among, like Ursula K. Le Guin can write beautifully. And in this book, there are passages that are really stunning. Then there's a lot of dry stuff also. It's just such a mix. It's not, one thing for sure. But it's a lot. There is an adventure. There's fun. There's technology. There's grand scheme. There's black holes. There's just so much in this book, and so much depth and so much heart. And then if you know where he comes from, and what inspired this, what tragedies he's seen, most of his family, not his parents, but relatives dying during the war, and where his outlook on humanity comes from, it makes it that much more powerful. And I think I have one more quote, if I may, from Lem, that kind of talks about his view of reading, in a sense, where some of the books that we read, and I'm guilty of this too, I enjoy reading a palate cleanser, as we call it, some, pulpy stuff. He did not. He would not read it. That's why he hated some of the pulp shit. He hated it with a passion, and he wrote eloquently and brutally about those books. And here's a quote that I have from him. Let me just find it. Oh, he talks about reading. So he says, "I never read to kill time. Killing time is like killing someone's wife or a child. There is nothing more precious than time." So he really values his time. And when it comes to reading, he was frustrated with a lot of science fiction output, which he thought was just poorly done. And he wanted to elevate the genre with more thoughtful, deeper look at humanity and our possibilities in the future, which good science fiction should really do. And that was kind of why he had this feud with a lot of authors. But for good or worse, that was his character. He did not appreciate light reading. He wanted things to be thoughtful, deep, and each book to have something meaningful to say. And his books, I think do, all of them.
And I love that he's trying to elevate the genre. He's saying there is good in this genre here, but why aren't you putting in some intelligence and literary sense into what you're writing here? And he had some conflicts with the Science Fiction Writers of America at the time, and revoked his membership, and some people were trying to get him back in. So there's a whole controversy there that maybe another time we'll talk about.
But, it was interesting.
Yeah.
The fact that he was given an honorary membership and then it was revoked. I think Philip K. Dick, after reading his books, he thought it was actually not possible for one person to be writing it. He thought it was Russian, well, not Russian, Polish in this case, but Eastern Bloc propaganda, basically many scientists and people writing together, publishing under the name Lem. Certainly not a typical Polish name, Lem. So that maybe would suggest, but later on they became more friendly. And Ursula K. Le Guin really loved Lem, and they were close. They wrote letters back and forth between the two of them. So he did have some friends among the science fiction authors, but he stood apart basically for the reasons that we talked about. He was disappointed by a lot of the writings.
So switching gear, what have you got coming up on your channel, or what are you reading now?
Oh, okay. So just starting Bone Clocks on a buddy read with Whitney. We've done a few reads together, and Sam from Sam Not So Wise.
I'll put links to their channels in the description too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're reading Bone Plugs, which I don't know anything about, but they wanted to read it, and I said yes. Why not? I haven't read. I wanted to read Cloud Atlas, but I figured I may as well start the journey with Mitchell with this book. So I don't even know if it's really proper science fiction. I know he plays with time quite a bit. Have you read anything by Mitchell?
No, I haven't.
And one book that I finished just yesterday is The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. And I loved it. I was really surprised how much I liked Gods Themselves. Very well done. A bit of a different read than Fiasco, but also great aliens. Here we get to know a lot about aliens, different philosophical outlook, but great book. Have you read Gods Themselves?
I have. And Asimov really didn't use aliens very much in his work at all. And so this was his return to science fiction after writing a lot of science books. I remember thinking that this was a very fascinating idea for aliens. Yeah. And I won't say anything more about that. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I loved Gods Themselves. And if your viewers haven't read it, I would recommend that book as well. It's maybe my favorite Asimov now. I read Foundation years ago, and I, Robot, which was okay, but I didn't love one. I felt like once I've read one or two stories, the rest was basically the same, just more of the same. But this was fabulous, so I enjoyed it. So it's a good reading year for me. I'm reading a lot of good stuff, and Fiasco is one of the best. I don't know what my favorite read of the year might be at this point, but Fiasco would be top 5, top 3 maybe. I have to think about it, but yeah, it was great.
Yeah, definitely. Lem definitely connects with me in the same way that Le Guin does as well. There's an elevated writing that's happening with those two.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
All right.
I love
Any
it.
last thoughts?
No, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I'm glad we could share some thoughts on the book, some thoughts on Lem, a little bit about my story that popped into my head about my childhood. So that was fun, just to kind of for this conversation to stir back some memories of end of 1981 December. Yeah, this was awesome. I appreciate it. Always great speaking with you, Richard.
Thank you. And I always love talking with you. I really appreciated that you came on for a second Lem video. I think the viewers can understand that connection you have and those personal stories. That was really great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Well, it was my pleasure.
Look for Fiasco. I think that you will like it. And until next time, keep reading.